more important thing for us to notice here at this stage is that if the court is in the favor of directing maintenance of status quo, in 2006 Supreme Court, the Supreme Court has indicated that the status quo is not a vague term. When you pass an order, you must be clear. The court must be clear as to what status quo it is ordering. It is just not enough to say that very well, there are disputed questions. I grant status quo. If there are disputes as regard possession, whosoever will be in possession would be there in possession. Without indicating, maybe on a prima facie basis, as to what on a prima facie basis is found to be in possession. So the Supreme Court has stated that it is always advisable that whenever you order status quo to be maintained, at least on a prima facie basis, mention as to what is found to be the status quo which is being ordered. Not leave it vague, which would have even more dispute to crop up in future. So that is a normal rule. The next slide, please. Now let us move on to the other topic. There is another type of injunction which we find, which we call it to be mandatory injunctions. Of course, the provision relating to mandatory injunction is mentioned under Section 39 of the Specific Relief Act. Question is, what are the parameters? Two things. Section 39 basically speaks about grant of mandatory permanent injunction. What is mentioned is that in order to prevent the breach of an obligation, if it is required to direct a party to do something, the court can always grant or issue such a direction which would be in the nature of mandatory injunction. Directing a party to do something, not merely to refrain from doing something, but to do something. Question is, what are the principles? And more particularly for our discussion, can a mandatory interim injunction be granted? And if yes, under what circumstances? A well-known judgment on mandatory injunction is 1990 Supreme Court in case of Dorab Kawasji, where the parameters are given. The Supreme Court says that this is an exceptional order, not a routine order, because you direct something to be done which was not there at the time when you file a suit. So it requires more than a prima facie case, a merely good prima facie case, but an exceptional prima facie case. A person is seen to have not waited or caused undue delay in approaching the court in seeking mandatory injunction. The test is this: when can you grant interim mandatory injunction? The test is, it can be granted to restore contested status between the parties which was existing on the day on which the suit or the legal proceeding was filed. Again, I am repeating, to restore the non-contested status between the parties. a person has filed a suit, immediately before filing the suit, maybe just before a couple of hours, before a couple of days, not beyond that, the plaintiff was in settled possession of the property. And that settled possession was unauthorizedly disturbed, forcibly snatched away. That gives a cause of action to the plaintiff to go to a court of law immediately and say that between the parties, I was there in a settled possession. Even the defendant was knowing that I'm in possession since long. So that was the non-contested status between the parties. There was no contest between the parties before that act of forcible dispossession took place. Now the plaintiff has gone to the court of law and asked for a relief of interim injunction in the nature of mandatory injunction, saying that I was in fact in possession just a day prior to my filing the suit. I was unauthorized dispossessed. Kindly, even pending the suit, restore the possession back. It would not be open for the court, for the defendant to argue that, well, now today when the suit is filed, I am in possession. I am in possession. It would be now decided at the end of the trial as to who should now remain to be in possession, who should be allowed to remain in possession. It would be only at the end of the trial of the suit. Therefore, do not grant injunction. That would be, if you grant injunction, it would be granting the final relief. Supreme Court says that it falls within the parameters of that test, which can be always applied, and you can grant interim mandatory injunction to restore the non-contested status between the parties. A slight deviation from this, where the courts have applied the principle of overreaching the process of the court. In the two judgments that I mentioned in the slide, the first judgment was in respect of plaintiff being the tenant filing a suit against the landlord, seeking injunction, restraining him to take away the possession. The suit came to be dismissed. The plaintiff tenant filed an appeal. Before any effective relief could be granted in the appeal, even an interim relief, which the landlord applied his own lock to the premises. The suit was dismissed. There was no relief to the tenant. There was no injunction operating, restraining the landlord to do something. But the High Court stated that interregnum period within which his own lock means that he has acted in a manner of overreaching the process of the court. Landlord was knowing that interim injunction is sought for against him. He was served with the notice of those things, and despite that, before any effective hearing could take place, he did that. To overreaching the process of the court ordered restoration, meaning thereby removal of law. Similar was the other case, where it was a case of filing of a suit in 1998 to GLH. Filing of a suit, seeking interim injunction. Before the hearing of interim injunction could take place, of course, the other side was served with the notice of interim injunction application. The other side took away the possession. It was the truck in question. The High Court stated that the very fact that the law does not encourage passing of ex parte interim injunction orders, would always expect the defendant to have a self-imposed restraint upon himself. That before the actual hearing can take place, he must restrain himself. Ultimately, when he succeeds in getting the interim injunction rejected, he can do whatever he likes. But self-imposed restraint is what is expected after a party is made aware that there is an interim injunction application pending against him. So in that case also the court held that this is overreaching of the process. The court ordered restoration. Next slide, please. Now there are various principles in different fact scenario, which I would hurriedly go through. Now, after mandatory injunction comes cost-based project. Normally, as I've indicated, normal rule is to maintain status quo, as we have seen. But this is an exception. Those judgments that I mentioned, they are dealing with those litigations which involve cost, construction, development activities. Now we have got, after the amendment, we got section 41 clause HA, which has been added, which says that do not grant injunction in a case of infrastructure projects which would hamper or deter such infrastructure projects. There can be cases where if you grant injunction, it may have a cascading effect. Not only the construction would be stopped, it would result into the mounting of the expenditure over a period of time. So there can be other ways and means. We got rule 2, sub rule 2 of order 39, which says that the other side can be, there can be terms and conditions which can be imposed while refusing interim injunction. Terms as regards security, terms as regards accounts, terms as regards leaving something aside, some portion of the project aside, something of that sort in the given fact scenario. So these are some things, some of the things which can be said to be exception to the normal rule of maintenance of status quo. The next slide. In a given case, the question also crops up. In a suit filed by the plaintiff, can there be an injunction sought for by the defendant against the plaintiff? When we read the wordings of order 39 or maybe for section 94, there is no prohibition, there is no embargo to do that. In a given case, one may find that the defendant may find that the nature of the suit which has been filed against him is such where, pending the suit, the plaintiff is likely to do something which may prejudice the interest of the defendant. Normally what we find is that in such cases, the defendant generally is found to be lodging counterclaim, which is just like a cross suit filed by the defendant against the plaintiff. Whenever there is a counterclaim filed, along with the counterclaim, there will be a counter injunction application. But it is not mandatory. Even if a person has not filed counterclaim, the defendant, without filing counterclaim, also in a given case, can seek counter injunction against the plaintiff. Maybe a rare case, but it is not prohibited. If it is found, the plaintiff has filed a suit for declaration injunction. The defendant finds that, in fact, he is entitled to the property. Therefore, pending the suit, it is likely that the plaintiff may alienate the property just by saying that he is entitled to the property. Therefore, it is better that pending the suit, even the plaintiff must be restrained from dealing with the property. It is permissible for the defendant to seek for counter injunction. Then, next slide, please. Then, next principle, and that is the principle of what we call it to be anti-suit injunction. Now, this concept of anti-suit injunction is under section 41 clause A and B of the specific effect. What do we mean by this? What we mean is that the other party from either prosecuting or even initiating other legal proceeding. The normal principle, as is given in the specific effect, is that do not grant such injunction, which would restrain a party from even approaching a court of law or prosecuting a litigation, some other litigation. But then there are very well recognized exceptions where such anti-suit injunctions can be granted. In this 2003 Supreme Court, it was a case where the injunction was sought for against prosecuting a litigation in a foreign court. Again, the court laid down the principles that for grant of anti-suit injunctions, there has to be exceptional good prima facie case, one, and the person against whom the anti-suit injunction is to be granted must be amenable to the jurisdiction of the court which is granting the injunction. In a given case, in the 2003 Supreme Court, the court distinguished between the two things. The court of normal jurisdiction and court of preferred jurisdiction. The court where the suit was filed was a court where the suit could have been filed under section 20. But the party, by virtue of some contract, had agreed that out of that courts of normal jurisdiction, they would go to a preferred court, which is known as forum convenience. That preferred court was a foreign court. So in that, when there was a specific agreement conferring jurisdiction to a foreign court, which was a preferred court between the parties under the contract, it would be possible for the court of natural jurisdiction to say that, all right, parties must stick to their bargain. They must stick to their contract. They must stick to their terms of the contract. Even if I have got the jurisdiction, which the court of normal jurisdiction would say, natural jurisdiction would say, the court can grant interim anti-suit injunction by saying that pending this, do not allow the other proceedings to go on if it is found that is violating the contractual terms and conditions. So that is the principle of anti-suit injunction. The next slide, please. There is another principle that is given under clause F of section 41. which is known as quae tamet injunction. It is applicable in a case of suit arising from nuisances. The normal principle is the next slide, please. The normal principle is that in a suit which are likely from nuisances, do not grant injunction, because unless it is established by evidence that that nuisance has led to the cause does not arise at all. In this 2000 Supreme Court, it was a case of construction of a bhatti for baking, and a neighbor of that bhatti filed a suit for restraining that plaintiff, that defendant, from starting with the bhatti after obtaining appropriate license. The Supreme Court declined the injunction, saying that mere construction of a bhatti is not ipso facto resulting into nuisance unless you are able to establish after actual commencement of the bhatti that yes, it has now resulted into nuisance. Thereafter, of course, you can seek for injunction. But before the nuisance actually takes place, normally you do not grant quae tamet action. So that is the next principle. Next slide, please. Then there are, of course, principles as regards invocation, injunction against the invocation of bank guarantees. Over a period of time, those principles have been well settled. Bank guarantees are the contracts, and there are solemn things which are between the parties. One, there is a party where one of the parties is a bank. Bank is not at all concerned with the other contracting parties, who is not a party to this guarantee. Therefore, the basic principle says that normally no injunction against the invocation of bank guarantee. The only two parameters when injunction can be granted in the exceptional cases are grave fraud, knowledge of the bank. Mere fraud is not enough. The bank must be knowing, committed between those parties where bank is not a party to the contract. And the other is irretrievable harm, again likely to happen if the injunction is not granted. These are the two parameters for granting the injunction against invocation of bank guarantee. These are all specified cases which may come up for the grant of interim injunction, which I am discussing with you on the basis of those settled principles which I am giving on those slides. Next slide is as regards negative agreement. Now we have got section 42 of the Specific Relief Act. What does it say? There can be a contract which may provide for two things. One is a positive agreement, affirmative agreement, along with a negative agreement. Now we know under section 41 of the Specific Relief Act, you cannot grant an injunction, a court cannot grant an injunction which it cannot enforce. In that King's Bank judgment which I have indicated, there was a contract by an actress to act for a particular company only, and not to act for any other company as an actress. So there was a positive covenant to act only for that company. And there was a negative covenant, negative agreement, not to act for any other company. Now there was a breach committed. That actress did not act for the company plaintiff. So there was a cause of action for the plaintiff company to go to a court of law. Question is, can the court enforce, specifically compel that actress to always act for the company? The answer is no. This is an agreement, this is a covenant which cannot be specifically enforced by the court of law. You cannot compel that actress that you must act. But along with this, there was a negative covenant. So section 42 of the specifically says that even if it is not possible for the court to enforce a positive covenant, can be the negative covenant can always be enforced. So it is possible the court can grant injunction, at least to the extent of negative covenant, restraining that actress from acting for any other company as an actress. In that judgment, the court granted a very limited injunction. What injunction? That actress is restrained from acting as an actress for any other company. The actress was not restrained from acting or pursuing any other avocation in life, but merely not to act as an actress for other company. So this is how there can be an injunction which can be granted for the performance of a negative covenant. The next slide, please. Now that is all as regards rule 1 and 2. Archit bhai, can we continue for 15 minutes more?
Yes, sir, we can continue, sir.
Okay. Now come the question of breach of injunction. Of course, we know provisions are under Order 39, Rule 2, capital A. Provisions are of any of the orders having been committed, which may have been given under Rule 1 or Rule 2. A party can complain of that breach, and there are consequences. There are consequences of breach, two consequences: attachment and arrest. Attachment of a property of a person who has committed the breach. Now, if there is a property which is attached, it cannot remain under attachment for more than 1 year. And there can be an additional step also which can be ordered, not be more than 3 months. Arrest under a civil prison. Now, one thing has to be made clear. Arrest would be an additional step. A court an order of arrest without there being any attachment order. There can be a mere attachment order, but a mere arrest order is not contemplated. That is one thing. Now, if the attachment order is continued for 1 year, and still the breach has continued, then the provision is that the court is entitled to, because therefore the court is entitled to sell off that property which was under attachment and pay as a compensation to the person who has suffered that breach. These are the provisions under Rule 2, capital A. Now, 2009 Supreme Court says that yes, that this is an enabling provision. But that has to be always resorted to very carefully, and mind well, the important thing is there has to be a clear language of injunction which must fall under rule 1 or rule 2 of Order 39. In that judgment, the order which was passed was directing the defendant to deposit a sum of money. The Supreme Court stated that this does not clearly fall within either Rule 1 or Rule 2 of Order 39. And if it is not so, one cannot resort to, even if that amount is not deposited, one cannot resort to Rule 2 capital A, proceedings for breach of injunction. That is one. One further thing as regards breach is, Rule 2 capital A does not speak about purging the breach. What do we mean by purging? Purging means to restore the position back before the breach which was committed. There is no specific provision for purging. Rule 2 capital A. But the Supreme Court has clearly laid down that the basic principle is that a contemner can never keep the fruits of the contempt with him. So it is inherent, this is what the Supreme Court says, it is always inherent with a civil court while passing an order under Rule 2 capital A to also direct purging to restore the position back. In fact, that would be in furtherance of the principles of justice. Also being sometimes asked, what is the effect of the order being committed breach of? Now there are divergent views of the Supreme Court on this point. The next slide, please. 1996 Supreme Court says, and it has taken the view, supposing a person has transferred the property in clear violation of the operative injunction. The Supreme Court says that whenever the court directs something, some status to be preserved or maintained, it is not only the right, but the duty of the court to see that it is so maintained. Whenever the court desires some state of affairs to continue, it is the duty of the court to see that that is presumed to continue. So even if something was done in violation of the injunction, the court would presume as if it is not done. This is the principle of the effect of breach. So if a person has acted something in violation of the injunction, the court would presume as if it is not done. But then there was a divergent view which was taken in 2013 Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court, where there was a case of entering into a sale deed, registered sale deed in violation of injunction. Supreme Court had the occasion to see as to what would be the effect of that sale. Now, despite noticing of 1996 Supreme Court, the Supreme Court ultimately held that the effect can never be to vitiate the sale deed. That sale deed would continue till it is set aside. Of course, there would be a good ground for setting aside that sale deed. The ground would be that it was executed in violation of the injunction. But till it is set aside, the sale deed would continue. But the further consequence which has been given by the Supreme Court is that that person would certainly be guilty of breach of injunction. The order of purging can be passed against him. The order of Rule 2A can be passed against him, that there can be consequences of breach of injunction, but that would not ipso facto be considered to be setting aside the sale deed as such. And now recently in 2020 Supreme Court, there are various other principles which have been given by the Gujarat High Court on the principle of breach of injunction, interim injunction. One principle was that there is no period of limitation to seek for breach. There is no period of limitation. Normal principle is 3 years within which a person can approach, but if the period of 3 years is over, one has to merely explain the delay. Other principle was supposing that interim injunction was granted by a court absolutely without jurisdiction. What would the effect? The High Court stated that even if it was without jurisdiction, that it was an injunction which has to be abided to unless it is set aside. So these are certain additional principles on that grant aspect. The next slide, please. Then comes Rule 3, ex parte injunctions. Again, we know that for the purpose of grant, normal principle is that the court shall not grant interim injunction without hearing a party unless the court record reasons for that, unless the court finds that the delay would be fatal. I'm going slightly hurriedly because of the paucity of time. Now, once it is found that an ex parte interim injunction is granted, there are two preconditions. One is the court has to record reasons. And secondly, there are procedural aspects that the plaintiff will have to serve the notice along with the relevant documents to the other side on the very same day, or at least by the end of the next day, and file an affidavit to that effect. These are procedural requirements. Question more important is, what is the effect of non-compliance of these requirements? 94 Supreme Court says the basic principle that whenever the law requires something to be done, it has to be done in that particular fashion only and by no other way. So the law says that there has to be recording of reasons, there has to be this procedural requirements to be followed, they have to be followed mandatorily. But then 2000 Supreme Court says that yes, that is correct. But supposing those things are not followed and the injunction is still granted without following, what is the effect of that injunction? Again, in 2000 Supreme Court stated that it is not that it would be considered to be no injunction at all. The only effect is that a person who gets the benefit of that injunction takes a risk. He takes a risk. What risk? That if that injunction is not followed, the other side not complain of its disobedience. The plaintiff cannot complain of its disobedience because those requirements which were mandatory in nature were never complied with. That is the risk which the plaintiff is taking if he does not comply with those parameters before seeking and getting ex parte interim injunction. So that is there. The next slide, please. The last rule is Rule 4. That is as regards this. This is a remedy. This is a remedy available to a person against whom the interim injunction is granted. Of course, we know that there are appellate remedies provided for. But one can also go before the very same court if a person is dissatisfied with the interim injunction. Two things. If it was an interim injunction which was granted ex parte, and if it is found that while seeking that interim ex parte injunction, the plaintiff had made some false misrepresentation or allegations or statement of facts, then it is a duty, the word used is shall. Once it is brought to the notice of the court shall discharge or set aside that ex parte, and which was founded on material misstatements. But in a case of bi-parte injunctions having been granted, the discharge, variation, or setting aside of the interim injunction can be only in a case where there is a change of circumstance subsequent to the grant of injunction. It is not a second inning. It is not a second inning before the same court. Therefore, there has to be a change of circumstance which has to take place, or it may cause an irreparable harm to a person. Unless those things are pointed out, else to be pointed out on record, you cannot go under Rule 4 before the very same court. Then the next slide is again many times the question is being posed: what is the date when the injunction comes to be operative? And 1967 Supreme Court says that whether it is an injunction or stay, the date when it becomes operative is the date on which the party comes to know about it. Either it is he's communicated with it, or he's by whatever means is imputed with the knowledge of such injunction. It's from that date it is actually granted. This is important, but from the perspective of its disobedience. Then the next slide. Of course, this is a well-settled principle that no, and this laid down. This, of course, we all know. It is reiterated by the Supreme Court that any finding which is given by the interim injunction while granting interim injunction can never affect the final decisions. Though, of course, day in day out, we find that even the courts giving that clarification after passing the final order that all our observations are tentative in nature. In fact, there is no such requirement to make such observations, but nonetheless, such observations are being so made. Then the next slide is in respect of many times interim injunction is being continued for a long period of time, years together. Maybe it is in the process of further challenge. The court would lean in favor of saying that, all right, now that it is continued, the balance would be in favor of continuing it and allow the suit to be proceeded expeditiously. That is 2009 Supreme Court. 95, Section 95 is again a remedy that if it is found and indicated before the very same court that an injunction was on insufficient grounds, pointed out on various subsequent facts by the defendant, then not only that the injunction can be varied as we have indicated, but the court has the power to grant compensation. Of course, not exceeding rupees 50,000. Court has that power to grant compensation. One thing is certain: if that compensation can be granted in the very same proceedings by the court, once that compensation is granted, that would be restrained on a separate suit for seeking compensation on that ground, because you already avail of that remedy in the very same suit. So that is Section 95. And the last thing is that there are, what are the remedies? We all know the remedies to challenge the interim injunction under the CPC are Order 43, Rule 1R. For filing appeal from order. The only thing, and if it is arising from an order passed by the commercial court, the only thing that I wish to highlight at this stage is that this is not a first appeal. This is not an appeal where the appellate court would be entitled in an appeal from order to substitute its own views. Therefore, it is known as appeal on principle only. That is in 1990 Supreme Court, which the Supreme Court has laid down. It is not as if that the appellate court would say that had I been in place of trial court, this would have been my findings. No, that is not the manner in which you deal with the appeal from order. Even if two views are possible, before an appellate court, if the trial court has taken one view, which is plausible view, the appellate court will not interfere. So that is that limited scope of appeal from order arising from the interim injunction proceedings. So I think that is all which I have to discuss today. Who wishes to have some question can always join me.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, yes.
Sir, my query is that I'm representing the defendant. I'm replaced by earlier advocate. Earlier, the defendant had, in a suit proceeding, defendant's advocate had consented for the plaintiff and court that the NM should be heard along with the suit. Without consented the defendant party. This have consent લીધા વગર કરી હોય અને this order has been passed in the year 2011. So
Yes.
what is the remedy available with the defendant?
Now what happens is this. As you indicated, it is a consent order to allow it to be heard along with the suit. There can be two cases. One, after that consent order, something happens. Something new, some new thing happens, which requires the plaintiff to say now under Rule 4 to the court that even if this was a consent order, these are the new developments which allows me to indicate to the court that this consent would not come in my way for either variation or modification of this order. That is one thing. If there is no new development, but nonetheless, one thing is certain that every litigation of his bona fide action on the part of his counsel, there is a well settled principle.
Yes, sir.
Then he cannot go behind the consent given by his counsel, which might have been given bona fide. So then in such circumstances, it can be always indicated to the court that allow the suit now in light of these circumstances to be prosecuted at the earliest because of these circumstances.
Okay, sir.
Hello, I have a question, sir.
Yes.
Three parameters which you described, that prima facie case, balance of convenience, and irreparable injury.
Yes.
Now, sir, this is in respect of interim injunctions, as you described. Now, the same principles are applied also in case of appeal, or also in case of petition while granting the stay.
Now, what happens is this. As I've indicated, when you go for appeal, if supposing writ petitions are there, in a writ petition, you are seeking for interim reliefs. Those interim reliefs are in the nature of interim injunctions only, because they are all original proceedings, writ petitions. Therefore, what you are seeking for are in the nature of interim injunctions. Therefore, naturally, those parameters would be applicable. In an appeal, if you are going for stay, that would be Order 41, Rule 5. Parameters of prima facie case balance would not be applicable. But additionally, in appeal, there are other parameters under Rule 5 which are mentioned. So when you are prosecuting the appeal, if you are prosecuting the appeal from order arising from interim injunction, of course those three parameters would be applicable. But you are prosecuting any other appeal, let us say first appeal or second appeal, and there you are seeking for stay. There you may be seeking for stay of the order or the decree, you may be seeking for stay of the proceeding, something like that. Then apart from these basic three parameters, there can be other parameters which you will be noticing under Rule 5 of Order 41.
Asit Bhai Joshi has one question.
Yes.
Asit Bhai.
Mehul Bhai, good morning.
Good morning. Yes.
Is there any guiding principle for grant of status quo instead of interim injunction?
No, as I indicated, guiding principles are all those principles that we have discussed. As I indicated, normal principle is that if there is nothing all those other exception circumstances that we have seen, then normal principle is allow the status quo to operate. But the guiding principles are all those things, those three parameters plus the conduct plus the things which where the court may come to the conclusion that instead of grant of injunction, certain imposition of conditions or terms to be imposed would be sufficient in the facts of the case, then no injunction can be granted. There is one further thing. At this stage, I may indicate to you, supposing this was not discussed by me, but now that you ask for, supposing a person is not granted status quo, something is done pending the suit, and the decree is being passed. The court has always the power, while passing the decree, to move. Court always has an inherent power to see that the relief which is even not asked for can be molded in light of the changed circumstances, and that would cover that even if the status quo might not have been granted and something is done, it can be remedied at the time of granting the final relief. Yes.
Karthik Bhai Joshi.
Thanks, sir.
Yes.
May I have another question?
So my question is only that. Yes, my question is that there is interim injunction application is pending of the plaintiff since long for 4 years. Thereafter, defendant has sold out the property to another person. Plaintiff joined that person as a defendant, and against him also there is interim injunction is pending. Thereafter, defendant newly added defendant filing a application for restoration of his possession to the property which was taken by the plaintiff. But the court has heard only interim injunction application, and interim injunction was granted, and thereafter another court rejected that restoration application on the ground that the my coordinate batch has passed the order that's why I am not intervening in it.
No, what happens is this. One thing is very certain, that there cannot be contrary or contradictory orders. The courts of coordinate jurisdiction. So, if one coordinate bench, after recording findings, maybe right or wrong, but recording findings on the same given set of facts, has refused the injunction, then merely because of the fact that the new defendant on the same facts, keep that in mind, on the same facts is seeking the injunction, the court would be well within its right by saying that no, there are no changed circumstances, the same facts you are agitating, therefore I will be bound by my predecessor's findings. But if the newly joined defendant can say that very well, the day on which the earlier injunction was refused, this further proceedings or further transaction had not taken place. So this shows the mindset of a person, of the plaintiff, to go on undertaking further transactions, which was not found the day on which interim relief earlier was refused. If this can be pointed out with supporting documents and materials, it would be justifiable for the new defendant, because one thing is certain. There can be more than one interim injunction applications filed in the same proceedings. Just because one interim injunction proceeding was refused does not ipso facto mean that there cannot be strict principle of res judicata applicable to interim injunction findings. But everything would depend on the circumstances. Normal rule is same findings, no second inning. But if there are changed circumstances, point out with changed materials on record, even the new defendant can always ask for, and where the earlier findings will not come in way.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Varshaben Brahmbhatt had one question. Varshaben.
Yes. Yes, Varshaben.
Sir, I was asking that one suit is filed for declaration and other things. Exhibit 5 was dismissed, and the suit was also dismissed for default. Now, possession was forcibly taken away by the plaintiff with the help of the police force and etc. So, what would be the remedy for the defendant for the said suit, or for the another specific suit should be filed under the specific relief act?
No, what happens is this. There are remedies under CPC also. There are remedies under 144 also, which is known as restitution provisions. If supposing a person has taken benefit, you are saying that the interim injunction was refused. For the present, take the case where the interim injunction was granted and the person has unauthorizedly taken benefit of injunction and forcibly taken possession, there can be a remedy of restitution. Question that you are posing is that injunction was refused and ultimately suit came to be dismissed for default. Here is a case where pending the suit, something was done unauthorizedly. Defendant had not asked for any counter injunction. Had the defendant filed counter claim, even if the suit would have been dismissed, the counter claim could have been independently assessed, and in that proceeding, the relief could have been sought for and granted to defendant. But here is a case where neither interim injunction, nor any final relief to the plaintiff, nor any adjudication to the plaintiff in his favor on merits. In that case, as you are indicating, there would be an independent remedy available to the defendant to file an independent suit by the defendant himself, but not in that suit which has been already dismissed for default, where he had not sought for any counter injunction. Yes.
Sir, can I ask one question? Sir?
Yes.
Sir, I came across one order granting injunction where the stipulated that if the suit is not tried within 6 months, stay will automatically, then the injunction will automatically get vacated. So can the court pass such stipulate such conditions while granting injunction?
To answer your question, speaking from myself, I would not subscribe to such a view. Person is coming before the court. He is coming before the court for a definite relief. Either it is granted or refused. Even conditional order also passed. But if the court says that I grant you relief, I do not grant you relief for 6 months, and after 6 months, if the suit is not decided, the injunction would get operated. So what would happen? There is no definite finding on the merits of injunction. It is just that the time not the proper method of dealing with the injunction application. The court must be very clear in its mind. Not grant injunction. There is no intermediate way out.
Jigar Bhai has question.
Yes, may I ask the question, sir?
Jigar bhai.
Yes, sir. Sometimes we find in some of the matters, and it continues for a long period. Cases ultimately it happens that the suit is expedited.
Yes.
That before the court. Supposing if it's an injunction against me, I tried my level best to conduct the matter for a number of occasions, but it. Can I then say that it is only the merits that is to be seen and not that suit be expedited and stay to be continued, sir?
Your question is germane, and you are, as a plaintiff, if these things has happened to you, you are well within your rights to indicate to the court that I was never at a fault. It is because of the proceedings which went into before the court for a long period of time, where I never tried to prolong the proceedings. That is one. And secondly, you must also point out, because as I indicated, that the court may find that very well, all right, you are not at fault. But what has happened in between? How have you suffered in between for this long period of time? Or whether you are able to withstand whatever your alleged sufferings during this period. If that is so, the court will always say that very well, now that you have withheld, maybe not because of your own fault, but because of the passage of time, but you are then the balance would lie that I will direct that suit will be over within a period of 6 months, and I will impose strict conditions to the defendant to cooperate. But you are all well within your right to say that no, during this period I have been suffering, and if the injunction is not granted or it is not vacated, I will be going on suffering, which would be irreversible or irreparable.
So that has to be demonstrated by me that what
But
loss I have.
that's what I'm saying, that the normal principle is to lean in favor of continuance. But that is normal principle. You can always say, no, that this normal principle should not apply in my case. Look at these circumstances.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Sir, we can take one or two more questions, sir. If any.
Yes.
any participants any questions?
Yes, can I ask? If
Yes.
sir, can suit for specific performance for the MOU executed in favor of non-agricultures for the agricultural land is maintainable? MOU is unregistered and not even notarized.
No. One, an agreement can flow from various. It is not always required that it must be registered. It is not required that it must be in writing. There can be cases of oral agreement also which can be specifically performed. So merely because of the fact that the MOU is not registered is no ground that it cannot be specifically performed. Of course, you have to demonstrate that that MOU was in existence. It was agreed upon between the parties. Parties were at idem, and during this continuance, it is sought to be sought to be not performed. If you the fact that the MOU is not registered is no ground to refuse relief.
And sir, what about the status of the land? Because land is agriculture and the purchaser is non-agriculturist.
Again, there it would be a kind of bar of other statute, namely the Land Revenue Code or the tenancy.
Tenancy Act.
Now, then it becomes, again, it would be a question of a prima facie case. What is the effect of such a transaction which the court has to consider under looking to the relevant provisions of that law? If the effect of making that transaction to be void, there cannot be a specific performance of a void transaction. If an effect of making the transaction to be invalid, there is a difference between voidness and invalidity, as is held by some of the decisions of our court. Then that is not null and void ipso facto. It has to be so declared. It has to be so considered and held so. So till it is done, it remains to be a valid transaction. And if it remains to be a valid transaction, one can say that a conditional decree of specific performance can be granted. What is conditional decree? That you grant specific performance with a obtain that permission, and then only that document can be executed. That is also permissible.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sriraj bhai, if you raised your hand.
Yes, Chirag bhai.
I have filed a case in a city civil court. I am appearing for the plaintiff. Now what has happened is that in 2005 a construction has been done of a particular building. Now on that particular construction an illegal construction has been made by defendant. So in 2005 we approached the AMC, and on a continuous basis till 2007 and 2008 we tried to approach them and to tell them that this is the situation and please take up some action, but no action was taken. Now certainly there is a gap of 10 to 12 years, and then after in 2015 or 2000 approached the AMC, and then in 2019 I filed the suit. So in this particular case, can there be a time limitation or time barredness?
So that's what I was indicating.
Yes.
That plaintiff pursuing his cause of action with an authority is no ground for him to stop running cause of action. Therefore, the cause of action has already commenced by the plaintiff when he knew that there is an unauthorized construction being carried out by the defendant on the property. Yes, he tried his other remedy of making grievance to the corporation. But what a reason done in that circumstance? A reasonable prudent man would have stated that, all right, I have a the corporation does not respond to me within 4, 5, 6 months. now it is high time that I must take some legal action if at all I am prejudiced, seriously prejudiced. If he does not do so, and after several years allowing that unauthorized constituent to continue, files a suit, as I've indicated, maybe that in a given case he may succeed in a suit, initially in the suit by saying that this suit is within limitation. The cause of action was a continuing cause of action. But the grant of interim injunction, the court may say that it is delayed. It is delayed, you have waited, you have allowed the thing to continue for such a long period of time with your own eyes. You should not be granted injunction. Maybe that at the end of the trial, we will pass necessary orders.
If any other party
Sir, I have a query. Hello.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Sir, Tanmay, this is Tanmay here. No, in a particular case where I am appearing for the defendant, for specific performance, the document was registered, agreement to sell was registered. However, the contents are, therefore I cannot deny the execution, but however, the contents of the document is highly improbable for the reason that total consideration was of 35 lakh rupees, out of which 30 lakh rupees was only to have been accepted by the plaintiff by way of case. That I am disputing it actually.
Yes.
But still court has granted the injunction. Therefore, my lord, my query is, what is the effect of registration of such document, my lord, in this case, sir?
Two things. One, you are not disputing the document.
Yes.
Or let us say it is a registered document, you are not disputing the registration, you are not disputing the signature.
Yes.
Question is, what you say is that the contents of the documents you are disputing. What you say is that the further performance pursuant to that agreement is being disputed. As we know, specific performance is again an equitable remedy, discretionary remedy. Therefore, if you say that the entire amount was, as is alleged, is paid in cash without disclosing anything by the plaintiff as to what is the source, how the amount had been disbursed, nothing has come on the record. It can always happen that the court can say that though I am believing the agreement, the other parameters, other considerations for believing the case as such are very weak. And in such a case, the court may say that even if there is an agreement, it is not a fit case. It is not a fit case for the purpose of grant of relief of specific performance at the end of the trial. Now, if the court comes to that conclusion on that consideration, the court may say that I will not grant you interim injunction. But everything would depend on the circumstances. Everything would depend on the materials on record. Therefore, it is very important, and that I'm again highlighting that it is very important when you are filing the application for interim injunction that you must highlight all those further things which would fall your case specifically under those parameters.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you all and wish you all the best.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.